To understand the dark, twisted psychology of Fyodor Dostoevsky's novels, you don't need to read Crime and Punishment. You just need to stand where he stood on the morning of December 22nd, 1849. Semyonov Square in St. Petersburg. The air is freezing, -20 degrees. Fyodor Dostoevsky is 28 years old. He stands in the snow, wearing a thin white peasant shirt, shivering uncontrollably. But he isn't shivering from the cold. He is shivering because he is looking at a row of soldiers raising their rifles. Dostoevsky, along with a group of young intellectuals called the Petrushevsky Circle, has been arrested for reading banned books and discussing socialist ideas. The Tsar, Nicholas I, wants to make an example of them. The verdict is death by firing squad. A priest approaches them. He holds out a cross. Dostoevsky kisses it, accepting that this is the end. They are divided into groups of 3. Dostoevsky is in the second group. He watches as the first 3 men are tied to the execution stakes. Hoods are pulled over their heads. The commanding officer shouts orders. Load! The soldiers raise their rifles. Aim. Dostoevsky watches.
Eyes.
He realizes he has, at most, 5 minutes left to live. In those 5 minutes, his mind races. He looks at the golden dome of a nearby cathedral reflecting the sunlight. He thinks, in a few moments, I will be part of that light. He feels an intense, overwhelming love for life. He thinks, if I could only live, I would turn every minute into an eternity. I would not waste a single second. The drums roll. The soldiers' fingers tighten on the triggers, and then a messenger rides into the square, waving a white handkerchief. Stop! Imperial pardon. It was a trick. A sick psychological torture designed by the Tsar. The death sentence had been commuted days ago, but the Tsar ordered the execution to proceed until the very last second to terrify the prisoners. One of the men tied to the stake goes instantly insane, never to recover. Dostoevsky falls to his knees, weeping. He is alive. But the man who got up from the snow was not the same man who knelt down. The young romantic writer was dead. In his place was a man who had looked into the abyss and survived. His sentence was changed to 4 years of hard labor in a Siberian prison camp, followed by forced military service. He was shackled in irons that weighed 10 pounds. He would wear them every minute of every day for 4 years. He was marched to Omsky, Siberia, at the House of the Dead. Imagine a place where murderers, thieves, and political prisoners are packed together in a filthy, freezing barracks. The floor is covered in inches of filth. The stench is unbearable. Dostoevsky, an educated nobleman, was thrown into this pit. The other prisoners hated him because he was a gentleman. They mocked him. They threatened to kill him. But it was here in the toilet of humanity that Dostoevsky found God. He found a Bible under his pillow, the only book allowed in prison. He began to talk to the murderers. He realized that inside these monsters there were sparks of humanity, generosity, faith, and sorrow. He realized that suffering was not just pain. Suffering was a fire that burned away the lies and revealed the truth of the soul. But Siberia gave him something else too, a curse that would haunt him forever. It began with a scream. In the middle of the night, Dostoevsky would let out a terrifying, inhuman cry. His body would stiffen, then convulse violently. Foam would form at his mouth. It was epilepsy. It's a sacred disease. Dostoevsky described the moments before a seizure as a flash of ecstatic harmony, a feeling of being closer to God than any human should be. But the crash that followed was hell. He would be depressed and broken for days, survive 4 years of hell. When the irons were finally struck off his ankles, he was 32 years old. He was free. But he was an addict, an epileptic, and a man possessed by demons. After his release, Dostoevsky tried to return to normal life, but normal was impossible for him. He craved intensity. He had stared death in the face, and now regular life felt boring. He needed to feel that rush again. He found it in the casino. In 1862, Dostoevsky traveled to Europe. In the spa town of Wiesbaden, Germany, he discovered the roulette wheel. For Dostoevsky, gambling wasn't about money. It was about fate. It was about challenging God. When he placed a chip on red or black, he felt the same heart-stopping terror he felt in front of the firing squad. Will I live or will I die? He became a pathological gambler. The addiction destroyed him. He lost everything. He lost his money, his watch, his coat. He wrote begging letters to friends, asking for small loans, then gambled those away too. The lowest point came when he was traveling with his new wife Anna. They were desperately poor. Anna was pregnant. Dostoevsky took her wedding ring, the symbol of their love, and pawned it. He ran to the casino, promised her he would win it back. He lost it all. Came back to the hotel room weeping, begging for forgiveness, throwing himself at her feet. Anna, a saint of a woman, forgave him. But a few days later he did it again. He stole her clothes to pawn them. He was a man out of control. Here's the twisted genius of Dostoevsky. He used his own degradation as fuel for his art. He was in deep debt to a predatory publisher named Stolovsky. Had signed a contract that said if he didn't deliver a new novel by November 1st, the publisher would own the rights to everything Dostoevsky wrote for the next 9 years. It was slavery. It was October. He had less than a month. He hadn't written a word. Desperate, he hired a young stenographer named Anna, who would later become his wife. He paced around the room, chain-smoking, and dictated a novel to her. He didn't have to invent the story, just told the truth. He wrote The Gambler. The main character, Alexei, is a man who destroys his life for the thrill of the wheel. Dostoevsky poured all his shame, his obsession, and his madness into the book. He dictated for days, hardly sleeping. They finished the manuscript on October 30th, just hours before the deadline. He saved his career. He turned his worst sin into a masterpiece. This was the pattern of his life. He lived in chaos, so he could write about chaos. He believed that you cannot be a good person until you have been a bad person. You cannot understand the light until you have sat in the absolute darkness. But his greatest exploration of darkness was yet to come. He was about to ask a question that would terrify the world. If God is dead, is everything permitted? In 1866, Dostoevsky published Crime and Punishment. It is a detective story, but it is unlike any detective story ever written. In a normal mystery, the question is, who did it? Right? In Crime and Punishment, we know who did it on page 1. The hero or villain is Raskolnikov, a poor, handsome student living in a tiny garret in St. Petersburg. Raskolnikov has a theory. He believes that the world is divided into two types of people: ordinary people, who have to follow the law, and extraordinary people like Napoleon, who have the right to break the law for a greater good. To test his theory, Raskolnikov decides to kill a useless, greedy old pawnbroker woman. He reasons that she is a louse, a parasite, and that with her money he can do great things. It is a rational, logical murder. He takes an axe, goes to her apartment. He kills her. But then, tragedy strikes. The pawnbroker's innocent sister, Lizaveta, walks in. Raskolnikov has to kill her too. The rest of the book is not about the police chasing him. It is about Raskolnikov chasing himself. It is about the fever, the guilt, the paranoia. Dostoevsky shows us that the punishment is not prison. The punishment is the crime itself. The moment Raskolnikov swings the axe, he cuts himself off from humanity, becomes a ghost. Dostoevsky was writing against the rising tide of nihilism in Russia, the idea that science and logic could replace God and morality. He wanted to show that logic has limits. You can rationalize murder, but your soul will revolt. Dostoevsky's later years were filled with personal tragedy. His first child, Sonia, died at 3 months old. Dostoevsky wept uncontrollably over her tiny coffin. He was devastated. Yet he kept writing. He wrote The Brothers Karamazov, a massive book about faith, doubt, and patricide, killing one's father. It contains the famous chapter, The Grand Inquisitor, where Jesus returns to earth and is arrested by the church because his message of freedom is too dangerous. By 1881, Dostoevsky was famous, but his body was broken. The years of prison, epilepsy, and chain-smoking he smoked while he wrote, filling the room with a blue fog, had destroyed his lungs. On January 26, 1881, his pen fell behind a heavy bookshelf. He tried to move the shelf to retrieve it. The strain caused a blood vessel in his lung to burst. He began to bleed internally. For 2 days, he lay dying. He asked his wife Anna to read the parable of the prodigal son to their children. Told her, "I have never been unfaithful to you, even in my thoughts." On January 28th, he died. He was 59 years old. His funeral was one of the biggest events in Russian history. 40,000 people marched in the procession. Students, workers, princes, and beggars walked side by side. They weren't burying a writer, they were burying a prophet. Dostoevsky's legacy is terrifying and beautiful. Freud called The Brothers Karamazov the most magnificent novel ever written. Einstein said Dostoevsky gave him more than any scientist. Why? Because Dostoevsky didn't look away. He saw the monster in the mirror and he didn't blink. He taught us that inside every saint is a sinner, and inside every sinner is a saint waiting to be born. He taught us that we are not rational machines. We are irrational, emotional, broken creatures. And most importantly, he taught us the lesson he learned standing in the snow in 1849, waiting for the bullet that never came: to love life. To love it even when it is dirty, even when it is painful. Because every second is a gift, and every breath is a miracle. As he wrote in The Dream of a Strange Man, the main thing is to love others like yourself. It's the main thing, and that's everything. Nothing else is wanted. The man who died twice finally found peace.